Cinderella, the high school musical, and who will be speaking on that?
I will be.
All right, Ryan, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Delacroix, and I have the privilege of directing the high school's musical this year, and we are doing Cinderella. Just for the record, is a new version of Cinderella. It's not the Disney Cinderella. I have brought with me several of our students. Hop on up here, kiddos. And they're going to perform a couple of songs for you tonight from our upcoming show. They are seniors, Heather Derrick, and she is playing Ella. Libby Huber, who is playing Charlotte. And Via Grant, who is playing Madame. We have junior Ali Joba, who plays Gabrielle, and sophomore Silas Heisler, who plays Prince Topher. We also have our amazing music director, Miss Carrie Heisler, who's going to play for them tonight. Performances are November 4th, 5, and 6, and 11, 12, and 13 at the high school. And more information about the show and for tickets can be found on our district website. They're going to sing 2 songs for you tonight. The first one is between Topher and Ella, and it's called 10 Minutes Ago. And then the 4 ladies, the step family as we call them, will be singing a song called A Lovely Night. Take it away, friends.
"10 minutes ago I saw you. I looked up when you came through the door. My head started reeling, you gave me the feeling the room had no ceiling or floor. 10 minutes ago I met you, and we murmured our how do you do's. I wanted to ring out the bells and fling out my arms and to sing out the news. I have found her, she's an angel, with the dust of the stars in her eyes. We are dancing, we are flying, and she's taking me back to the skies. In the arms of my love I'm flying, over mountain and meadow and glen. And I like it so well that for all I can tell, I may never come down again.
Minutes ago I met you, and we murmured our how do you do's. I wanted to ring out the bells and fling out my arms and to sing out the news. I have found him, I have found him. In the arms of my love I'm flying, over mountain and meadow and glen. And I like it so well that for all I can tell, I may never come down again. I may never come down to earth again. A lovely night, a lovely night, a finer night you know you'll never see. You meet your prince, a charming prince, as charming as a prince will ever be. The stars in a hazy heaven tremble above you, while he is whispering, darling, I love you. You say goodbye, away you fly, but on your lips you keep a kiss. All your life you'll dream of this lovely, lovely night. A lovely night, a lovely night, a finer night you know you'll never see. La la la, la la la, la la la. You meet your prince, a charming prince, as charming as a prince will ever be. La la la, la la la, la la la. The stars in a hazy heaven tremble above you while he is whispering, darling, I love you. You say goodbye, away you fly, but on your lips you keep a kiss. All your life you'll dream of this lovely, lovely night. The stars in a hazy heaven tremble above you while he is whispering, darling, I love you. You say goodbye, away you fly. On your lips you keep a kiss. All your life you'll dream of this lovely, 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 lovely night.
All right. You bet, absolutely. Before you go, is there any board members that wanted to ask a question or comments?
I am happy to comment. I am so excited to see this show, and this is just marvelous. You obviously are not my children, but I feel like you are. I'm super proud of all of you for doing this. It's just amazing, and we're all excited to see you, so good job. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Molly, for those comments, and thank you for your performance, and looking forward to actually the musical, and coming up in a couple weeks. Folks should get their tickets before they're sold out. All right. Next up, then, we have another recognition, Nick?
Yes, we have actually. We do have another recognition. This is actually, we have two board members that are being recognized by the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. We have Jamie Johnson receiving his Level 4 designation, and Heather Loglin receiving Level 3 designation from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. And I think what is neat about this is you'll be getting your pins and certificates at the upcoming regional meeting. But to give people kind of a little bit of a background on this is essentially in order for you to achieve these different levels, you get points by basically going to additional trainings and conferences and things along those lines. I don't know if level 4 might be as high as we've ever had anybody get, Jamie. So that's impressive. Or level 3, also right there. And so, big thank you for all the time that you guys are putting in and the effort. And so, if you are attending that regional meeting on the 26th of October, you'll be receiving certificates and pins. So, thank you for attending. So, well done.
Congratulations, Heather, and I guess, yeah, it is a function, I think, of being on the board for a while, and if you attend the regional meeting, I guess you get more points. So, all right. With that, we'll move on to the next.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I think it's worth pointing out to folks who might be watching that if you were to decide to run for school board, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards provides a lot of opportunities to get trained on the stuff that, speaking from personal opinion or personal experience, you never thought you'd need to know to serve on school boards. So just to know that if there are folks out there who are thinking about it, there is a great resource with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, along with our own administrative staff who are great orienting new school boards. So just good for folks.
Yeah,
to
but
know.
Heather, you don't get points. With our administration, you
No
won't get
points for meetings with administration. That's
Right.
correct.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is citizens' request to speak about non-action items. The chair has the discretion to limit it to less than 3 minutes, but I'm just opting. We may have more than 5 speakers, but tonight I'm just allowing the extra minute. I would just ask the speakers to please abide by that, and if my timer goes off, that means that you are done. Otherwise, I'll have to shorten everybody's to 2 minutes. So if we could do that, please. And I have to remind folks that the public comment is for input only. It's not a question and answer session, a time for debate, or a dialogue session. Members of the school board will not respond directly to public comments that are made at this meeting. No specific action will be taken at this meeting in response to comments that are made or issues that are raised during the public comment period If the board determines that action is appropriate, the action will occur at a future board meeting. And a district representative may follow up with you after the meeting. The board chair will recognize one speaker at a time. Only those speakers who are recognized will be permitted to speak. Individuals who interfere with or interrupt speakers of the board or the proceedings may be directed to leave. Now, this is not a time for personal attacks or concerns about a specific individual, including any other speaker during the public comment session. Those type of comments are not acceptable, as are, of course, obscenities or profanity. Persistence in making such remarks will end the individual's opportunity to address the board and may result in the individual being directed to leave. So first up, we have Talia from the city of Hudson.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I just wanted to share, students should be able to enter school free from judgment from the school officials and their peers. The primary responsibility of the school administration is to create and sustain a school environment in which each student is accepted, valued, respected, cared for, and encouraged to be an active, responsible member of the broader school community. They must also support an environment where diversity is valued and accepted, where students of diverse backgrounds and identities are affirmed, supported, and assured equitable educational opportunities. Within our own district non-discrimination policy, it reads in part, "With this goal in mind and consistent with legal requirements, the district shall not unlawfully discriminate on the basis of sex, including gender identity, expression, and nonconformity to gender role stereotypes." By the district administrating disseminating guidance to the principals of schools to cease and desist open dialogue of pronouns, informing guidance counselors that should a student disclose to them they identify as a gender-diverse human who wishes to be called by a chosen name and affirming pronouns, the counselors are being mandated to report this to said child's parents. In doing so, you're not only violating the student's constitutionally protected right to privacy, but also directly violating your own non-discrimination policy. By specifically targeting transgender and gender nonconforming students, you are creating a hostile educational environment which emboldens abusive behavior from others, victimizes our students, and violates their right to exist. Our students shouldn't have to lay bare their soul for the school board or anyone else to validate their right to privacy and access to a safe educational environment. I hope what has been conveyed to the broader community is a case of deep miscommunication on behalf of the district leaders who disseminated such guidance. If this is indeed the case, I would strongly urge the school board and administration to update communication with the district educators and staff to reflect guidance that is non-discriminatory in nature and that helps support a healthy school environment that does not violate our students' civil rights, verbal rights, and right to safety. Let me make this very clear. Being uncomfortable or having uncomfortable conversations with our children about the existence of someone different than how they may identify is not discrimination. We are all allowed to carry fervent faith and religious belief. No one is demanding anyone stop believing as they do. No one is demanding you identify as anyone or anything other than what you are. What is discriminatory in nature is informing the student populace who doesn't conform to that ideal that they are not allowed to exist, they are not allowed their identity, and they don't have the right to personal boundaries or a safe educational environment. We can all stay strong in our personal faiths. However, we do not have the right to force that religious belief from one segment of religion as the basis for discriminatory guidance in what is supposed to be a neutral, inclusive, secular educational environment for all. And the package that I shared with you all has case law, recent found case law as well, and law that backs my
All right,
statement.
well, thank you very much. Next up, we have River from the city of Hudson.
First thing I would like to say is I apologize for having to wear a hat indoors. The reason as to why I'm wearing a hat indoors is because of the risk of possibly being targeted and possibly being relentlessly bullied for being a transgender student at Hudson High. Let that sink in. Me, a student at Hudson High, having to hide their face due to safety concerns. As a student at Hudson High School who is medically transitioning, it was, to say, at least a big deal for me to notice at Hudson that they were including pronouns for once at Hudson High, because the school finally acknowledges acknowledge that not every person is a heterosexual cisgender person. That people could use pronouns that weren't assigned to their biological sex. I'm at risk at Hudson High every day with the supposed legal rules that Hudson said will take place. The rules of teachers having to out their students to their parents. I'm not out to a parent of mine that's due to safety concerns, and with the rules that Hudson is implying, it make it it's least to say nerve-wracking for me to possibly be outed to this parent. There needs to be a change in the way Hudson School District is dealing with the pronouns usage, because you never know what the person's home life is like. So you will be putting the student at risk. Take mine as an example. Thank you for listening to what I have to say.
Thank you. All right, next up we have Hannah Young from Hudson.
Hi, I'm Hannah Jung. Good evening. Hudson mom of 4. I'm here to express my support for non-binary, trans, and all LGBTQ plus gender diverse students and educators. I openly support pronouns and the chosen name of a student as that student discloses, along with creating a classroom environment where they feel safe to do so. As many of you know, research has shown that all it takes is one trusted adult affirming a youth to make the difference between hope and despair. It is your obligation to protect all students and create a safe, inclusive learning environment. They are obligated to address any complaint of harassment, discrimination, or abuse against students on school grounds or sponsored activities. By blocking supportive use of pronouns and chosen names in the school environment, the school is effectively telling our students that they must change who they are. If it has not been addressed by now, I would hope that the Hudson School District will come up with a policy that is respectful and inclusive to all on this topic, so there are guidelines for new staff and educators. Our kids have the right to a safe educational environment, and I will not be silenced by those trying to deprive gender diverse students and educators of this. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Next up is Sue Katas of North Hudson.
Sue Katas. Congratulations, Jamie and Heather. Notable numbers.
Thank you.
I addressed this body in August regarding the school climate for kids who identify as gay, lesbian, queer questioning, and gender diverse. And recently I sent everyone an email providing evidence that the school district is at times an unsafe place for children. I included an actual alarming incident from a year ago about a transgender student who was pushed and shoved around in the boys' bathroom. And I realized that maybe, I don't know if my message, I'm the messenger, I don't know if my message is having any impact. So tonight I thought I'd do what good school board members always do, and that is make data-based decisions. So I'm going to move to measurable data to hopefully help us see that we need to be educated about non-binary youth. Tonight, I went ahead and looked at the 2021 Yarbus report, and I know at some point you're going to get some disaggregated details for specifically for Hudson. But I looked at the St. Croix County Yarbus results, and that includes 4 high schools. So this is not just trimmed down for our school district. So overall, among all students, as far as school climate, bullying is a problem at school, and the indicator was that 36% of all students indicate that there is a bullying problem. So that's 1 in 3. And on page 21 it says, while higher risk groups often report a lower sense of belonging, teachers, administrators, and classmates within a school can have a tremendous impact on how included or excluded such students feel. So then I skimmed down to the part that specifically LGBTQ students at a glance, that's the headliner, And if you want to skip ahead, that's like page 81. Students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender tend to be at a higher risk than their peers in a number of areas. And they covered 4 areas: sense of belonging, bullying, having a teacher to talk to, and mental health concerns. So these are the specific numbers that are quite outstanding. They're kind of like cold hard truths. Sense of belonging among LGBTQ, 36%, but then straight and cisgender, 69%. So that is a sweeping contrast. And the quote under that on the Yarbus report, by the way, Yarbus is a youth risk behavior survey, for those of you that may not know what it stands for. But it said school climate and culture can influence students' sense of belonging. Oh, am I done?
Yep.
Shucks. Okay.
Time is up.
No problem. Just go to the next 2, okay? One of them is not so bad.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Addison from the City of Hudson.
I'm going to be really quick because I'm sorry that they've been a little disruptive, but I'm Addison Filiatro and I live in Hudson, and I am here to support LGBTQ people and asking the school board to come up with a procedural policy so that teachers can consistently and equitably implement pronoun usage. You can do it in a private manner. It's so simple. It can be as simple as a Google form, train staff, and as a teacher, it's just nice to have an inclusive classroom. And from looking at the curriculum, there just isn't a lot of LGBTQ voices in the K-12 curriculum, including social studies, and there are some really cool LGBTQ historians that could be included, or historical figures, sorry. They have my phone with my stuff, so I apologize for but no. But like, anyway, so that's my support. Just please create an equitable policy so there's consistent implementation or procedure. And then my other quick comment is, I know I've emailed you, but I really love Willow River, and I know that we all love our elementary schools, but I don't think that, I know that the budget is tight, but I don't think that you can really quantify a neighborhood school. And it is a neighborhood school where everybody's walking their kids to class on the first day. And the communication is so great because it's a small school and you want your elementary schools to be small. You don't want them, I really love my school. All right, that's all.
All right, thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Liz from the City of Hudson.
Hi all. I didn't plan to speak tonight, so I don't have anything prepared, so I'm going to just try to go off the cuff. But I work in the school district. We talk a lot about trauma and equity. We had a gentleman from UW Stout, I think in 2020, John Clem, came and spoke at the beginning of the school year about trauma and students who are living in trauma. And that was the most informative preschool meeting that I've ever gone to, and probably as a parent, the most informative thing that I've ever listened to, because he talked about, first and foremost, we don't get to tell people what trauma is. For somebody, they might make it through life-threatening experiences. For another person, it might be very mild, according to us, but to them, it might be huge. And through his lens and through that conversation and his PowerPoint, which I have, I mean, I can send it to all you guys too, I began to look at my own son in a totally different light. And my oldest son, Max, is gay, and he's been, I've known since he was 2 years old, and it's probably nowhere near as difficult as being transgender. But I began to see his experiences in school through this trauma lens, and I realized that everything that was going on to him was foreign to him, but he tried very hard to fit in all the time. So every Jersey day, he pretended like he cared about football. Every football game on the playground, he pretended like he cared about that. When he started becoming involved in theater and kids teased him about it, he told them that his mom made him do it. He hid from kids, he avoided classes, and all the while it was because he was so anxious inside of himself because he knew he was hiding something. Now, I think he really made it through school because he had the absolute unwavering support of his family. And I give a lot of credit to my husband because he watched him at home in little dresses and performing plays to us and saw all of that and just, loved him like crazy. But I know that he did not get out of school the education that he should have because he was spending a lot of time in that fear, fight or flight part of his brain. And it wasn't until too late that I really understood that. So when we talk about trauma and we talk about it, we're causing trauma to these kids that are in school that don't feel like they fit in, that don't know where they fit in, that don't feel like they have a place. And for us to acknowledge that struggle, for us to acknowledge that they are, choosing who they are, that they are using the pronouns that they identify with, it's infinitely, incredibly important. And when we talk about equity is tied into that too, because equity is different than equality. And for us to talk about equity and to have equity in our district, it's not about our buildings and our spaces and our rooms and our places and our technology. It's about the students having the right and the ability and the connection to a meaningful connection to educators.
Thank you.
Within their schools.
Thank you for your comment. Okay. Then next up we have, I can't get this thing to stop now. Hit cancel. It won't stop. All right, we have one more speaker, and I'm sorry on the pronunciation. Jayla, thank you. I didn't know if that was an H or a Y sound, but I'll just go with. I'm Jamie Johnson, so I'll go with Jayla then. All right.
Jayla.
Jayla. All right, very good, Jayla. Jayla Beer Hudson. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So studies have shown that when there's just one accepting adult in a transgender youth's life, they have a 39% lower suicide risk. When there's one accepting adult in a child who is non-binary, that number is 33%. Imagine an entire school of people being supportive, using the pronouns that they identify as, using the name that they want to use. By teachers asking if they have a preferred pronoun, that does not harm a straight cisgender student. By refusing to let teachers do that, that automatically dismisses any student that does not fit in that norm. That is not okay. The definition of progress is forward and onward movement. Over the years, Black people have been identified as slaves, 3/5 of a person. Without progress, they would not be treated equally. Over the years, just barely over 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. Without progress, all you ladies up there wouldn't be able to sit up there. I know it's not the norm that we've all grown up in over the decades, but we need to normalize teachers asking a student's pronoun, students being comfortable to identify if they choose to. For every student that identifies and openly, there's probably a good handful more students that do not feel comfortable being out, but just knowing that that safe place and that acceptance is there can do absolute wonders.
All right, thank you for your comments. Next up under the agenda are reports. And I'm assuming, Dave, this is yours since...
Yes, it is. Yes, thank you very much, Jamie. So I thought what we do tonight is provide an overview of the teaching and learning presentations that my team actually and I will be bringing in throughout the year. The idea is to give you an overview, a quick blurb about what each of these presentations will be, and also an opportunity for you to suggest other topics that you might want to hear about throughout the year. So we're on October 10th right now, and you are receiving that overview of board presentations. On October 24th, we plan on bringing forth inclusive practices and prescriptive interventions. This is something we've been working very hard on, and that is creating more inclusive interventions. That is, when a student receives support, making sure that they receive that support as close to their classroom environment as possible. Most often that means in their classroom. And prescriptive interventions means having interventionists provide direct support to teachers, providing them very specific plans for interventions for their students. And then, just like you would if you go to the doctor, this is what you're going to get, this is how long, and this is how we're going to check to see how that's working. Rather simple plan, but it takes a lot of work to get there. November 14th, for those of you, and I'm sure that Heather and Jamie have heard about the science of reading, probably something that WASB has been presenting on because it's a hot topic. Essentially what it means is that when we instruct reading, there's a lot to the very specific science and the steps that students go through when they learn the science of reading. We were super excited. We opened up a training with a program called Letters. It's a nationally renowned program for the science of reading, and we opened up voluntarily. The response was overwhelming. The majority of our primary teachers elected to be part of the first 2 cohorts in this training, and the training's going very well, so we'll be giving you an update with that. November 28th, we'll be focusing on the coaching model, and that's our primary professional development support for teachers, so you understand the model that goes behind instructional coaching. December 12th, family engagement update. This will be internal family engagement. What I mean by that is we have a standing committee of teachers dedicated to improving family engagement. We meet regularly throughout the year. They'll be providing an update to their work. December 19th, curriculum transparency and trust, and then using the Embark platform. Used to be called Build Your Own Curriculum. Now it's called Embark. A different company bought that platform. Essentially works the same way, but working to build trust in the community by being absolutely transparent with our curricular offerings. Then we have a couple open dates there. January 23rd, Human Growth and Development. This will be essentially a process update for you so you can see where we're going with the Human Growth and Development Committee. That work has been outstanding. I'm so proud of the team and the parent volunteers that are part of that crew. Had a couple of them actually here tonight, a couple of them present. Just a lot of really strong engagement, digging into the topic and coming to understanding both sides of a complex topic. February 19th, we'll be bringing forward the winter assessment results from our FastBridge Universal Screener. We're going to teach you a little bit about a quadrant report, which essentially is a process teachers go through where they analyze the achievement and growth of their students and then plan based on those results. Then we get into some of the curricular things. Remember last year we talked about science, brought in the science, actually social studies rather, social studies, a little bit of science to let you understand the resources that we would be recommending for adoption. Same thing this year. Bringing them a little bit earlier so we have time to make the purchase, make sure we have those resources on hand before summer hits, because that's when we do a lot of our professional learning. So you'll have a chance to review our final recommendations at that point. For K-5 Science, 6-12 World Language, and K-12 Art. Those are the 3 on the board work session. Then we have an annual report that is, I think, something everyone enjoys. It's the Career and Technical Education Work-Based Learning. It's where we have Robin Rivard and Leslie Laskacek come in and share their collaborative work supporting all students as they transition out of our K-12 program. And then on May 8th, we thought teaching and learning volunteer recognition. We are getting a lot out of volunteers that are putting in so much time to help us improve our program and to make sure that the voice of our community is heard in that program improvement process. So excited to bring them forward. And then we have the year-end reports that we're used to. And then finally, academic standards notification, a little more perfunctory at the end of the year. Again, there's open spots and we can always bring in other reports. So if there are things you'd like to hear about, feel free to let us know. We'll certainly put together reports for you to make sure you get the information you need to stay informed. Questions? Sure. I think you are correct, yeah, so that would actually move over to the May 22nd. Yep, yeah, thank you, Jamie.
I just want to clarify that.
No, I don't think so.
Know that us televising action meetings and not the work sessions would
Yep,
cause disparity between how we report the tree.
absolutely.
Just from time standpoint, try to split them up a little bit.
Look at that, done.
Yeah, so Dave, and I'm sorry, maybe you clarify this, but am I right that the reason that we have in February, March, and April, that we have those 3 curricula pulled out is because those are the 3 that are at that stage of review where we are selecting curriculum? Is that why those 3 are
That's
called out?
exactly
Okay.
it. Those are, we'll always bring forward the phase 3 curricular areas because that's when we're going to be making decisions on resources. We'll have already established the priority standards, already established the outcomes and essential questions, enduring understandings, which are the really high level things. Then we're getting into the nuts and bolts and ready to actually write the curriculum. And that's, we think, is the appropriate time to bring it to the board so we can bring you sort of a full platter of what's been done to build the most effective curriculum.
And could you remind me, and maybe remind everyone, are we still using the My Curriculum online? Is there an online resource for parents or community members who want to go and look at any curriculum, are wondering what is it that we're teaching?
Yes, exactly, and that's the December 19th presentation. It used to be called Build Your Own Curriculum. It's now called Embark. A different company bought it. It is on the web page. It's up and active, so at any point you can go there under the curriculum tab and see a full accounting of what we offer. Yep, thank you.
So with this scheduling for February, March, and April that Heather just pointed out, it looks like we have 2 areas for every grade that's being reviewed. And we're splitting the science so that the elementary is now in the world languages for the secondary school classes. Just curious why we're not doing science now.
That's a great question. We started the process K-12. The secondary just got a little bit ahead and we were ready to make that decision, so we brought that forward previously. So it's just, we usually start K-12, but depending on what the content area is, as an example, elementary English language arts takes longer, so that tends to get delayed a little bit. So just trying to balance things out. The other thing that plays into that is the budget. Some curricular resources are more expensive, so we need to balance that from year to year to make sure we don't have several really expensive implementations one year and then not the next.
Okay. But these are all on basically 6-year cycles then?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for the report and look forward to the work we have cut out for us at both the work sessions and the meetings. At this time, we now move on to our action agenda, and I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda items pursuant to the expenditures language.
Mr. President,
Rob?
I move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $2,837,425.77.
All right. We have a motion by Rob, second by Bob. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and all the items of the consent agenda are approved, including the expenditures. Next up is the financial projections and potential need for operational levy. And Nick, I'll turn over to you, and you'll probably turn it over to Bonnie. But I guess we have 2 different things. One is budget assumptions and then budget forecasts. So.
And Tim is passing out right now some hard copies, so you don't have to try to flip between screens. So you're getting copies of that. And Bonnie can kind of walk you through these different options. But, we were able to, through Baird, start to do some budget projections looking out, over the next, 4 or 5 years, and what does that look like. We've talked about multiple times when we look at the elementary facility projects and things like that. What's the long-term savings or cost associated with things, and then also what is our budget picture or budget outlook as we're looking at this. So I'm gonna let Bonnie kind of explain through some of these things, and then we'll talk on a much bigger picture also, so you kind of know what you're looking at. You have 2 different documents.
Sure, thank you. So we're going to go through this slide, which is the assumptions first. So in this rejection to the district. And what we talked about last month was, new to this. What we talked about last month was student enrollment is the main driver to all of our financial projections in the district. So during that study, Applied Population provided us 3 scenarios or 3 different frameworks of how they projected enrollment. One was called baseline, one was a 5-year trend, one was 3-year trend, one was kindergarten trend, and one was residential trend. So what we did was we took each of those models and used their enrollment projections to try to project budget scenarios for the district in the upcoming years. We did 2 scenarios for each model. The first scenario, so if we look at that first page, that baseline forecast is the governor's proposals funded in its entirety. So what that would be for the 23-24 school year is a $350 increase in the revenue limit, a $766 per student per pupil aid, and a 45% reimbursement for categorical age for eligible expenses.
And just to clarify, in the per pupil aid, it's about an increase of about $40, $30 or $40. It's not an increase of 766. So it's about a $40 increase.
Yep. And then in the 24-25 school year, that increased to $811 per student for per pupil aid, and a $650 per student increase in the revenue limit. So pretty substantial. Also, an increase in categorical aid at 60%. Currently, special ed categorical aid is about 28%. So that's a nice bump that he is recommending. We did go out for the 25, 26, 26, 27 school year. Just made some basic assumptions. So increase that per pupil aid the same rate that he had, that was presented in this year's governor's budget, and also increase the revenue limit at $300 per student for, which has kind of been the trend in the last years prior to this last 2 biennium. Some other assumptions we made, the wage increase, we said 5% for the next 2 years and then 3% after that, and then benefit would follow suit. And then the second, so that's kind of that first scenario, and then the second scenario, we costed everything out at 50%, because pretty often the governor makes a proposal, it goes to the legislation, they say 0, they meet somewhere in the middle. So then we did a projection based on 50%. So as you can see for the baseline forecast, the highlighted line with the red basically projects the deficit that the district would be facing using that enrollment projection. And then if you look at the, next page would be the 5-year, it's basically this exact same information based on the different enrollment trends for each of the projection models.
Bonnie, just to clarify, and these projections are all based on status quo with existing programming, existing buildings, correct?
Correct. So this is just no change in staff, and that's one thing. We just used like one, because if you drop 100 students, obviously you're going to drop some staff members too, but we just thought to just project it out equally, we just kept the same base information. And then the second document is basically the exact same information, but it's a copy of, we worked with Baird. They have a whole projection model. We imported our information and then did the projections out. So it's more detail of the exact same information, just to answer where does this information come from.
I think, a couple things to note here is those red numbers at the bottom of each fiscal year are not cumulative. Those would be every year's balance at the end of the year. And so when you look at the Baird budget forecast model, you can see our fund balance, which is kind of the middle of the page, halfway down. You can see it start to decline rather rapidly should we do nothing. And again, there are assumptions in here. Bonnie and I have spent a lot of time talking about it. What are reasonable assumptions? Some people would say it's not reasonable to put in 5% wage increases this coming year and the next. So you could argue that reasonable would be 2%, reasonable would be 8%. We know that right now the WERC number, which is the They set CPI for the state of Wisconsin as far as what we use for bargaining purposes. Right now, it's sitting right around 7.3%. It's gone up every single month since it locked in last January. It won't be locked in for this coming year until January. Essentially, what happens is we'll get the number in January that is the number in which we have to use for bargaining purposes for this coming school year. But historically, prior to this really high level inflation right now, we've historically been around 3%, right around there. If the board does a board increase of 2%, when you lay the performance systems on top there, it comes out to be about 3%, give or take. So try to be somewhat conservative in those estimates. And again, I think the DPI budget, which is created with the governor's office, it's the high water mark. So the governor's proposal at 100%, we would think is best case scenario. Now we could be absolutely, wrong, and the legislature presents a budget even higher than this. You'd be shocked, but then we thought we're not going to give the absolute worst case scenario, 0, because the likelihood of the legislature giving us 0 again is slim to none. I mean, just regardless of the outcome of elections, and so. What could be a potentially more realistic scenario if we got half of what was being asked for in the budget process. And I think, as Bonnie talked about, there's 5 different models that we're using here based on enrollment projections. So we're looking at, the baseline, like you said, kindergarten model, 3-year trend, 5-year trend, and then redevelopment trends. And all of the models, really, when you start to look 4 or 5 years out, are deficit budgets within about $1 million of each other. Give or take, depending on which proposal happens. But as Heather said, this is if there is nothing done. I mean, keep the same amount of staff, keep motoring through type of thing. And you've heard me talk at the parent meetings that, we're sitting on quite a bit of fund balance. We can weather some storm. We just can't weather it indefinitely, because you can see over the course of about 5 years. In just about any of these scenarios, we drop anywhere from 15 to 25 million in fund balance, and that starts to hurt quite a bit as far as being able to continue down the path. You can also see how, without doing anything, it starts to exponentially build upon itself. It gets worse and worse each year, which kind of leads to, we had some questions about different savings under some of the different options related to the facility pieces that we were looking at, and what does that look like. We did look at, I'm going to pass some of these out. What this is kind of an amortization schedule of based on the different options. So we have, there's essentially 5 different options that we're looking at to solve some of our facility situations. From option 1, the reason option 1's not on this, because there aren't any savings related to option 1, so there's nothing to amortize out related to option 1. But what you can see is options 2A through E. The reason they're all the same price in option 2A through E is they're just different configurations of the same option. And so when Bray gets done kind of putting the numbers to everything, it's the difference between a new building versus a remodel addition building and stuff like that. But the actual staffing model doesn't really change. Inclusive in here as well on the amortization chart is also the savings of the closure of buildings related to utility savings of those buildings. So not taken into account on any of these savings is any additional savings we would get through energy efficiency or things like that in the existing buildings that stay open. There starts to become, we can dig into that deeper as we look at it, but it's been our experience that as the buildings become more energy efficient, even when they grow in size, we're not we're not spending more money on utilities, we're actually spending less money on utilities. But, so what we try to do is look at a conservative look at, with the different options, over 10 years, how much would it save? Over 20 years, how much would it save? Obviously, option 5, which I think has somewhat been called the nuclear option, which is all of a sudden major shifts in grade configurations, 8th grade to the high school, 5th grade to the middle school. It does have a little bit different twist to it than what Bray was looking at. It would be that if we couldn't pass a referendum at all, and we had to get down in size, it would be going down to 3 elementary schools with shifting those grades up, because it would be similar to option 3, which is 3 K4s and 5th grade at Prairie. The big difference is we'd be pushing kids up into the other buildings. And so there's reason there's more savings there is because you're now essentially closing yet another building. So there's some additional savings that way. But what we are planning on doing is having, when we do look at the different options and we look at the budget projections, is on each option we're going to put kind of the savings or the cost associated with the different options over 10 years, over 20 years, so that people have this information with them as well, with the cost of the options. What questions do people have?
So Nick, to clarify and make sure I'm understanding correctly, so like with option 2, when we're talking about the savings, is it the savings of, you said it includes the operational savings of the closed buildings, but is it also is it savings compared to option 1, which is
Yes.
making all the investments in all of the existing buildings?
This is purely doing is the savings from the reduction in staff, and then the utility savings from the closure of those 2 buildings. There's no other. It's a very kind of conservative estimate, so we're not taking into consideration energy efficiency improvements at the other buildings or anything like that. This is purely looking at if we were to go to, let's see here.
So this is just the operational, this is capital investment aside, this is just when we're talking about the efficiency of serving our kids with less buildings, this is just the cumulative operational savings of doing that through each of these different 4 options?
Yes, so
Okay,
this would
thank
be
you.
the reduction in the amount of staff we would need to do it, and also the closing of those 2 buildings from a standpoint of paying their utility bills every year. So just to give you a little bit of a breakdown, we spend about $50,000 to $60,000 a year at Holton Elementary, utilities and some supplies in order to maintain the building, and reoccurring costs such as pest control and waste services and things like that. So that's figured into there. At Willow River, we spend about $165,000 a year when we talk about utilities, sewer, water, supplies are needed just to maintain the building, and then reoccurring vendor cost associated with, like, again, pest control, water services, miscellaneous things. And then at North Hudson, we went and did that because if you do option 5, we had to kind of look at what that would be. Option 5 would be at North Hudson. It's an additional about $90,000 a year is about what we spend on utility cost in that building. So those are part of this amortization number. So as you can see, the savings at 10 years for the middle 3 options, basically the going down to 4 elementaries of something, saves anywhere from 32 to almost $35 million over 10 years, and over the course of 20 years saves anywhere from 77 to $81 million of operational costs. And this is maintaining all of our existing programming. So this is not cutting specials. This is not raising class sizes. This is not cutting counseling services. This is really implementing an elementary program based on the class size guidelines. Tracy's been working on a frequently asked question sheet coming out of the parent meetings. And one of the things is, will class sizes go up? I mean, yes and no. If you're at Holton and you're used to 14 or 15 kids in a class, then more than likely you're going to see a class size increase to closer to 20. If you're at EP Rock or Rivercrest or Prairie, you may see class sizes staying about the same, or maybe dropping one student on average per class. So the one thing that won't go up is the class size guidelines, based around this model. And so one of the things that Bonnie also ran with numbers was kind of looking at, so what kind of operational referendum would we need on top of this? Rob's asked that question too. So basically, there's about roughly a $3.2 million savings with most of these options. You take that off the deficit in 25, 26, and that tells you about what you have left that you're still deficiting at that point. You take it off, you take about the same number off 26, 27, and that'll tell you what the deficit would be projected for that following year. Again, there are other things. These budget projections are still giving people raises, trying to stay competitive in the market, trying to keep all the programming going. But I don't see a scenario, even if we get down to 4 elementaries, where long term the district doesn't need an operational referendum to go with the scenarios. Maintaining 6 elementaries, which is still an option that you guys wanted on the table, you'll need a operational referendum, a much larger operational referendum long term. What other questions?
Mr. President?
Yeah, Rob.
So just quickly, where are you at with the concept of going to the community with the survey? We talked about Peter Leatherman, we talked about school perceptions. In a one-on-one conversation, you mentioned a third party. What are your thoughts?
So, we still haven't gotten direction. I mean, the board's going to need to tell us, go to survey or don't go to survey, start building, even if we don't know what options they are. But at least coming off the last work session, it seemed to me like there was still not an agreement on whether or not the board wanted to go to survey again, or if they wanted to do phone polling, or if they didn't want to do phone polling or a survey. So I would just need that direction from you guys on what you guys want.
When would you expect to get that, Nick? When do you think that we need to give that to?
I would say at the very latest, we would need that direction at the work session coming up in 2 weeks.
At the extreme very latest. Extreme very latest. I mean, we're already at a point where if we were to want to mail a survey, we can't do it. We don't have the time. I mean, 2 weeks from now, likely the only survey option, and Peter Leatherman, he does surveying, it's just a phone screen type, that he probably will be the only option we will have access to.
Yeah, I mean, we've sent the survey out. The last survey, I believe, went out the 10th or 15th of November. It was drafted in less than a week, printed in about a week. So, yeah, I mean, I would say, we would, like I said, the 24th of October gives us probably about 2 weeks to draft it, complete it, have you guys review it at the November meeting if you're okay with it, and then send it out if that's the direction you want to go.
But this would be a survey that we would not write.
What's that?
This would be a survey that we would not write. We would still have a professional third party.
Yeah, we work with whomever we deemed we wanted to work with, whether it be a phone survey or a applied school perceptions.
I mean, school perceptions right now, I think would turn us down because we couldn't get the work, we couldn't get it out in time. And I could be mistaken on that. Anyway, Jamie, I interrupted you.
Yeah. Well, because it's not part of our agenda, and I want us not to get into, the logistics of the survey regarding the facilities, because that's going to be discussed at the work session. But to Rob's point about timing, when we did do a survey on November 10th or 15th, the last time, we had those results by when?
They were due back, I think, about the 4th or 5th of December, maybe a little bit after that. And then you went over the results at the December work session, which is usually the Monday before winter break.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you were able to go through them again on the January regular meeting, and then you had until essentially the work session in January, you have to make your decision on what you want to do referendum-wise. I think, and Matt brought it up, there's 2 points to a survey. One, to get information out, and one to obviously get feedback.
Educate.
Yeah, to get information out. And I think the idea that you're going to get some great feedback from the public by doing another survey, I think I personally, I don't know if there's going to be a huge benefit. I think you'd have a better benefit of polling and doing phone polling that way, but I just don't know how many people are going to say, yes, I want to vote to close my schools. That's why, and that's one of the comments that Matt said as well.
Right. But again, on this whole point about surveys and stuff, it doesn't have to be decided tonight. We can talk about it at the work session. And whether we're going to referendum or not doesn't have to be decided till January 23rd. So we're still.
We have a little time, but as Rob said, there is time of the essence. I mean, I will tell you, as I told you at the last board meeting, my original recommendation was to go to 4 of something, and the board chose to keep 6 as a viable option. Eventually, you're going to have to get either to 6 is your option, or 4 is your option, or what 4, or whatever it ends up being. The longer we push some of those things off, the tougher it's going to be to kind of pull things together. I will say we have the community meeting on November 1st. We should have all the costs associated with everything ready to go. We do have a newsletter that's going out in the next 2 weeks, so it'll hit a week before that meeting. That'll go into every mailbox. It will have information about what we're asking people, and then in addition to letting them know about the November 1st meeting that's going to be at the middle school. So we're ready to, send those things out and get that all the timing on those things. So, I think
before we talk about the elementary parent meetings, which I think is the next agenda item, do board members have any other questions about these budget forecasts or budget assumptions that, Bonnie reported on? I mean,
No, great work, Bonnie.
I think where Rob's going with this is, to me, and I would tend to agree with this, is that once you start looking at these numbers, it's kind of obvious the direction we need to go. And I think as a board, we need to give that direction to the administration, to our architect, et cetera, to move forward. But rather than, continuing to delay that process. But I think that these budget numbers are kind of overwhelming, so maybe that's what's got everyone's cat's got their tongue about it. But I think it's, it's not looking real good. And I don't see how we could continue to operate 6 schools. I don't see how we could do that given these numbers.
I think speaking to these numbers, what it makes me think is how important it is first that the community understand these numbers. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that these 2 things are interrelated. But my worry is, and I hear what you're saying about the sooner we move to 4, the more we're able to move ahead with a plan that is likely to be successful, if that's the direction we go. My worry is that if we don't spend the time sharing these numbers with a community in a way that they understand, we're going to end up with a community that does not think that we did due diligence and is not going to understand then why we're going to capital. I mean, so I feel like this has to be a really big part even of the community meeting on November 1st, is leading with, not leading at all with the capital part, but really leading with a 101 on school financing and why we're concerned, no matter what we do with our schools, why we're concerned, and then moving into kind of here are some options that we've been discussing, one of which is keeping schools open, but understand this is the context in which we're operating.
Will the mailer have the financial data, or are we waiting till November 1st for that? The mailer's going out,
By
what,
financial
2 weeks?
data, what we're seeing here tonight, or?
Yeah, I mean, whatever we were planning on having for November 1st, you said a mailer's going out. 2
Yes,
weeks
so it will have high level and then directing people to the website. So all of these
All of this,
documents
okay.
will be linked to that elementary facilities page. So we'll have a QR code directing people back to it. So just high level information about this and then directing them to the website.
Mr. President, I wonder, and I realize this is putting a lot on already full plates, but I think one challenge is that for a whole lot of people, it is really hard to look at these kinds of documents and make sense of them. And so I wonder if we could do some sort of a short-ish video that would walk people through in regular language, you know, pointing to, but kind of in the, kind of for the I'm not a spreadsheet person, that would help give them the same kind of information, but in a way that's more easily digested. I think that would be nice to have that on the website as an option as well, prior to that November 1st meeting.
You know, our public, we are asking them to support, and we don't know what the referendum amount is, but hypothetically, let's say it's $70 million in order to save $2.4 million, which may escalate over time. During the parent meetings, I understand during the teacher meetings, there was no real discussion on how, looking at our mission statement, how this was going to improve the educational quality of our students at the same time reducing schools. It's a focus on the dire financial straits of our school district. And so to have any, at this point, and of course I'm supportive of doing something, but not having the engagement where they understand what they're going to be getting in return before we're asking them to make a decision is going to be challenging for all of us. And we're not going to get that support. So my question to Nick, to you, is that is there an opportunity, maybe for the board, to focus on an operational referendum? We've done a fantastic job talking about the financial dire straits that we're in. We haven't done a fantastic job talking about the benefits of these brand new educational spaces in smaller buildings or in fewer buildings. And so what if we were to focus on this operational referendum first? And then take a year, work with our community, get them to understand the benefit. Maybe we close the school, don't know. But a year from now, have a plan where we can say, look, even though you were kind enough to pass this operational referendum, we may be able to create an under-levy again, although temporarily, if we were to go to referendum, and this is what those savings would be. And so I think that would be broadly more well-received than trying to go at the pace that we're going right now. And again, this is just me talking, but I think we're much better positioned to pursue an operational referendum by itself right now than a capital referendum, especially since we can't go again for a year after April 23. Again, just my 2 cents.
You run the risk of how you're going for 2 referendums, and the promise, kind of the perception might be that this operational referendum will delay, potentially the inevitable closing of 1 or 2 schools. Are we setting ourselves up for you're coming at us again? And the concern was there 2 years ago, and now you're coming at us again.
But that's where the communication would come in.
But we'd
have to tell them what the long-term plan is and that we will be coming back another time for capital, and this is why, and here's potentially the benefit.
We have to do a better job of, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. A speaker said tonight about how, everyone walks to the first day of school at Willow. Well, we know that's not true. It's just not true. About the perception that you're going to close some schools, you're going to have less teachers, without the understanding of, well, we're going to have less students, or we're ignoring the efficiencies that, make, or the inefficiencies that make Holton a concern not for Holton, but for the rest of the district, as far as efficiency. So, I don't know. I'm not in favor of multiple asks. I think we have to do our job, and we have to get the information out there, and it is what it is.
Just to clarify, Bob, you're not in favor of multiple asks in consecutive years or multiple asks in 1 year? Or just multiple asks, period?
Multiple asks, period, but
yeah.
Separate years.
Well, I think that Nick was rather clear, and I think Bonnie's numbers kind of show it, that we're going to need an operational levy regardless of what we do with our buildings. So I think that we need to continue to move both forward at the same time, and again, have the public get to understand the numbers. I think that the notion that they can't understand this and we have to spoon feed it over a period of a year and a half is, I don't think it's accurate. And I think that an operational levy with a capital referendum is something that we should go for and then see where the vote comes out, because if we don't get either passed, we are stuck with making some real hard decisions. So that's what I think anyway. But Carrie, you were going to say something?
Thank you. Yes, I would agree that we would be negligent not to address this now. And it's not just a savings of $2.5 million. It's, cumulative 70 or 80 over 20 years. And again, don't sell the public short that they can digest this and understand it. Emotionally, it's tough to hear, but certainly they're capable of understanding the numbers and understanding our situation. And if they choose to support 6 schools, that's something that we'll need to hear that they're willing to pay for.
Mr. President, one thing that you said, Rob, stuck with me, about kind of leading with the fiscal crisis. And it does make me think, well, we have a lot of communication to get across. Maybe we need to be even more intentional about leading some of these conversations to what we're committed to maintaining for our students. Because I think, that's really the challenge we're presenting, is that we want to maintain strong specials. We want to maintain small classroom sizes as defined by our classroom guidelines. Maybe to lead with we want to keep what's good here in Hudson, because the paren is, we're not going to be able to do that if we don't do something financially, right? But I think maybe to be really intentional about communicating that up front. And I do think the both and, the capital and operating, it's obviously an oversimplification, but there's your mortgage and your budget, right? There's the home you choose to live in, and there's what you spend every month. And if you have a significant change to your family income, again, simplification, you look at both. You look at, can we afford to keep living in this home that we love? And what changes do we need to make to our income and our expenses in the meantime? So I think it's that both and so it feels like what we're saying is, this is what we want to maintain for our kids here in Hudson, and to do that for the long term, we're going to need a two-pronged approach. We're going to need both some operational savings, and even with those savings, we're going to need some levy support, and we're going to need to look at what we're spending on our mortgage, on our capital pieces. But I think that's I would agree. I worry that they're so interrelated that while I hear what you're saying, Rob, I worry that disconnecting them almost then feels disingenuous. Like we have to be able to present them as two parts of it's the mortgage and the monthly budget outside of the mortgage. It's not one and then the other.
And certainly don't want to be, disingenuous, certainly as a board, as we represent ourselves to the public. The concern that I have is that we don't have enough information, nor have we even thought about starting to communicate what are the things that are going to be better in the remaining schools that will help our kids. All of the conversations so far have been about our financial needs. And we'll get to the parent conversation here in a second, but I had heard from the teacher meetings that the conversation was, their takeaway, that districts in dire financial situation, you're closing 2 schools, and teachers can't do anything about it.
Well, I think that'd be an oversimplification, but I don't know what else to tell you. Every projection we have shows massive deficits.
Yep.
So whether people like it or not, or they want to hear it or not, or they're upset about it or not, we have to make adjustments to how we operate. The only way we can make adjustments to how we operate without having a significant impact on the educational delivery model in which we deliver is to have fewer facilities. It is what it is, and people can be mad about it, they can be upset about it, but at the end of the day, we can maintain the same level of educational experiences for our kids in 4 buildings, whether you have remodels, new builds, or existings, is what we have now. Continue to push this thing down the road, we can't guarantee that.
Yeah,
And maybe that's something, when they're saying what benefit are the 4 buildings, maybe that's something, if they're so tied to 6, that they don't want the same programming and they don't want the same class sizes. So that'll be a decision or a discussion that comes out November 1st. If specials aren't important, if, maybe class sizes of 30 to 35. And that's what we'll need to hear.
And I guess my point, and Nick, certainly you delivered the message that you had to deliver. That you did as well as you could have done in those meetings. I guess my point is that it would have been wonderful to have had Bray at a point where we had schematic design at a high level, so we could say, this is what these 4 buildings would look like. Here's where special ed would be, here's potentially what a classroom would look like, here's the flow, positives versus resting on solely the adversity of what we're contending with. Give some of our parents that are actually losing their neighborhood schools, something to be positive about.
Yeah, we would, and Bray absolutely would like to do that too. We just can't do that with 19 variations, because we're trying to keep, that's how many different variations we technically have with these 5 options, from priority 1 and 2 type of investments to full build outs to new buildings. And so we did have some high level schematic design last year with Wold that they presented, which were primarily boxes on paper, but that very detailed part of the drawings comes, and it came at the high school time with the secondary space after the board determined the option they were going with. That's when you saw the potential plans that Bray came up with that we used during our referendum meetings. It was not at this stage in the game. We are literally almost identical to, again, where we were in 2016 as far as our timing moving along that pace. We have been talking about facilities and the elementary facilities for over 3 years. This isn't like, a new thing. We sent a lot of newsletters out over the last couple of years. We sent emails out recapping our facility committees last year. It's now becoming very real as we are hitting a financial wall that is going to say, you probably can't keep kicking this thing down the road. Something's got to give. Kate had something, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my 2 cents, I guess. 2 things that I don't know if I've gotten a clear answer for is the priority 1 and 2 that I see in this summary that we sent out last time, or that we had at the meetings. Can we clarify priority 1 and 2 and what that means?
Yep, we can, and that's on the website. There's a definition of priority 1 and 2, and it's actually broken down by each building. And then I sent you guys both the full report, which was I think 70-some pages, and then I also sent you guys a summary report that breaks down those priority 1 and 2s and what they entail. But I can resend it if you'd like.
No, I'd like it just in simple terms for people who are watching today. Priority 1, from my understanding, is like roofs, heating.
Boilers, roofs,
Right.
electrical. It's things you have to do because eventually they're going to fail on you.
So priority 2, though, is where I have a question, because from what I can see, that's having equitable space in each building.
That would be more your priority 3s and 4s. So priority 2s would be then move into your kind of like flooring, painting, some of those upgrades that you're going to do, because when you come in and redo a space like the mechanical systems and spaces, it's a pretty big investment in that space. That's why you would then do some of those secondary things that are listed on there. So, for example, it wouldn't make sense to come in and do all new lighting in this room and then come back 3 years later and do all new ceilings. you know, and have, you know, it'd be kind of, if we're going to do all the lighting and we're going to do all the electrical in this room and we're going to sprinkle it, it would make sense then to put in the new ceiling tiles and those types of things. So that's why 1 and 2 tend to go together a lot. When you talk about 3 and 4, that's when we're starting to talk about moving walls and starting to get flexible classroom spaces. We're talking about, you know, some of those types of kind of how we deliver instruction. Basically, if you think about priority 1 and 2, as Matt described at the last meeting, it's basically things are going to look the same with the guts of the buildings upgraded and potentially, you know, yeah, maybe new carpet, maybe new paint and new ceilings, but not necessarily, the building's not going to function any differently. You know, it's going to function like it always was intended. And that's what's kind of laid out in those things.
Okay, and then my other question was, we haven't put a cost to each option yet, and for me, that is big picture, and that's
Mhm.
something that I definitely feel like I need to see in order to make.
Absolutely, and they're literally going to cost out all 19 options.
Okay,
And
that will be ready when?
that should be ready for you guys, I would imagine, by your work session on the 24th for you guys to review. So that's about a week before everybody else.
Okay.
Everybody else has it on the November 1st meeting.
And then my last comment
Mhm.
is that we got all of this feedback from these meetings,
Mhm.
and Tracy wrote it all up for us, and I've
Mhm.
looked at a lot of it. My concern is that we are moving quickly. I'm not sure that we're taking this feedback and saying, maybe running some of these numbers that people are, or ideas that they're giving us. You know, I think that-
Any for example that you think
like
we're not?
when I heard a couple people saying, let's look at closing the admin office and closing one of the schools and run those numbers, just so they can see what different ideas are and feel like they came to the meetings and gave ideas.
So going
felt heard.
to 5 instead of 4, is that what I'm hearing you say? Elementary wise? Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can, that would be additional options. So I guess that would be the question I'd have for the board. When you're looking at the feedback, is it that you're getting feedback on these 5 options, or are you looking for even more options for us to potentially look at and price out as we work our way through this?
Just before we talk about that, I guess, are we done talking about the budget forecasts and the assumptions? Does
Well,
anybody have any questions on that?
Does anybody feel our assumptions are, I guess this would be a good time, does anybody feel our assumptions are not reasonable?
I just have one question.
Mhm.
On the amortization at the top, you have rate of increase and then 1.05 and then rate of increase 1.03. Is that making an assumption about the bonds that we can get and the rate?
Nope.
Or what does that
So
mean?
really what that is it kind of coincides with what you see the assumptions on the budget stuff is if, you know, we would hope that inflation would start to get under control, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, and we'd be back down to some level of normalcy in that 3% range. But we also know that it would be really hard for us to think that we're going to be able to operate as normal over the next 2 years, given the current environment. And so that's why those 2 years are kind of set a little bit different. The other piece is the first 2 years in the amortization schedule are not part of the schedule. Those are, because you're not getting any of those savings, because we haven't made any changes to our configuration.
So it's an amortization, but it's an amortization not for a bond?
No.
It's through an amortization?
Of
like
cost.
Of costing? Okay.
Amortization of cost.
Okay, that makes more sense to me.
Yep.
But that's savings from regarding the facilities question, which is different than the report that Bonnie gave, which is on the budget projections and assumptions. And I guess my question to that, Bonnie, is, you know, and I know that we're asking you to do a lot here in these projections, and we probably need some projection from a political scientist to say what's going to happen in November, because that's going to have the biggest impact here. But these appear to me to be potentially optimistic, I guess, in the sense of only 5% wage and benefit increases for 23, 24, and 24, 25. Now, maybe inflation is going to get shut off like a spigot, but even if it tapers in, it's likely to come in at higher than 5% for each of the next 2 years. But I know you got to start somewhere, and so I guess we're being hopeful maybe that it will get back down below that.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of discussions and we went back and forth each way. We also thought 5% salary increase might not just be what the raises are, but it might be our staff turnover. We might hire, senior people might leave and bring in. So we thought overall a 5% seemed pretty, we didn't want to say like 10% and be over pessimistic. So that's where we came with the 5%.
Oh,
But this is, when you say governor's proposal, is that DPI or?
I'm sorry, it's DPI's to the governor's for his
Okay.
biennium budget.
Right.
And when does that voted on or happened or passed or?
It could be
In theory,
June.
it should be July 1, but.
So it could be a
it's been
different,
as
so it
late
could
as
be a different
October.
governor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So this is DPI's proposal, which they have worked with the governor to create this proposal. I would be absolutely shocked if the governor's proposal, the current governor's proposal, doesn't mirror this proposal. That would be completely out of left field. I think the other thing is there's going to come a point where you guys are going to have to balance as a board the need to give raises and the need to live within our means. And it's, I can tell you that if, you say, well, we're just going to not give, for every percent on the wage benefit is about $500,000 is what kind of Bonnie and I were looking at. So you say, well, at 5%, that's $2.5 million if we just froze everything. That would take care of deficit for next year, which, I guess technically it would, but then going back to strategic plan and everything else, how attractive of a district are we to want to work in? And what type of employees are we able to attract as we do that? And so it's trying to come up with, as a board, you may not be able to give a CPI type of increase. But I also would say is I think long term it would probably hurt us worse to say let's freeze if everybody else around us is giving raises. It's going to be very difficult for us to attract workforce. So that's where that 5%. More than likely, that CPI number is going to come in potentially 3 or 4% higher than that 5%. It's just I don't know how we would go to the public and say, hey, we're going to give 8% raises and we need an operational referendum. But I also don't know how we go to our staff and say we're going to freeze your pay in times when it's 8 and 9% inflation. It's.
Well, and I think that's another one of those things that, as we're leading off with what we want to keep doing in this district, to be leading off with, we want to be able to attract and retain good people. And while that doesn't mean giving the highest raises of anyone in our region, we want to be reasonable. It also means that we want to be competitive because we don't want good staff to leave because we're not acknowledging them. And so I feel like that's part of that, setting the stage for the positives, what we are committed to, before we start talking about the cliff.
The other assumption, Bonnie, if you could address that you have for this forecast, because you're only going out basically 4 calendar years beyond our current budget year. And that is 5% equalized valuation growth. And we know that cumulatively over the last 3 years, it's been closer to 30%. And for this forecast, we're assuming 5% for 4 years, which is cumulatively about 20%.
Yeah.
So my question is, what if instead of a 5% assumption that our equalized valuation growth continues to go closer to that 10% per year? What does that do then to our state aid?
So it's not going to do anything to your revenue limit because that's purely based on enrollment, but a really good point is that it's going to reduce your equalization aid because the higher value behind every pupil is going to reduce your aid, and you're already in negative, or we are already in negative tertiary aid. So as that value keeps going up, we will lose more aid for every dollar we spend.
And I think that the thing is important people understand is that really is determining our mill rate. It's not it doesn't help our budget. By the district's value growing, it doesn't actually help our budget because the budget is set, as Bonnie said, number of kids times what we get per pupil. That sets our revenue. Now, the blend, whether it's coming in state aid or property tax, is in there. But I mean, we could have 40% valuation increase, and our revenues will not go up. They'll hit these targets.
But the reality is, if our enrollment figures don't match valuation growth, then we end up losing aid.
Correct.
And that's been the trend for 4 years.
But we don't lose revenue. We just lose aid, and I think that's the thing we just got to be clear with people is we still are on the revenue side of our budget. It's just we're forced to put more on property tax, but it's not as though our overall revenue goes down because of that. Our revenue goes down when we don't get when our student count goes down, is essentially what happens. So. We're having declining enrollment, and really people say, well, how do we go from such a surplus in the last couple of years to such a deficit so quickly? Well, the biggest thing we have is we've dropped, close to 300 kids in the last 3 years. When you figure, and when all of a sudden you have that amount of students that eventually walk out of your budget, essentially that money. It's not that they're leaving to go to other districts. It's just we're not replenishing like we have in the past. It creates a pretty big hole. And there's the declining enrollment exemption, and this started hitting us 3 years ago. Our declining enrollment started hitting us 3 years ago. Extreme declining enrollment, and so now it's starting to. What's happening is we're losing that exemption, and that's why you're seeing all of a sudden a drop so quickly. And that's why when we talk about, we're not in a dire strait like, hey, you guys need to make cuts this week. We're not going to be able, I mean, yes, there are some real, fiscal headwinds here. But the good thing is we are positioned that, we can ease our way into this potentially over 2 or 3 years. Very difficult for us to get the operational savings if we don't do something different with our facilities. I mean, it's really hard for us to get any real type of savings. And the biggest reason why we haven't looked at 5 after last year's facility committees is it seemed like it would be a lot of change and we wouldn't get the type of savings that we'd want, and we could potentially be looking at closing yet another elementary school a couple years down the road. And so if you talk to parents from Holton, they say, let's go to 5 and close Willow. And if you talk to parents from Willow, they'll say, let's go to 5 and close Holton. And so, it's not that we haven't looked at it. It didn't seem like it was, it would generate the type of savings that would warrant that type of change to the district.
Right. Any other questions about the budget? Otherwise, we'll go into the parent meeting follow-up. All right, hearing none, I guess we started talking about this a little bit, but Nick, did you have other comments leading in, or Tracy?
Tracy, you want to just kind of talk about what your process has been since the meetings and what we have set up and how it's laid out?
Absolutely. So the first bullet on the site there is the actual feedback. So what you have there are the comments that were left at the 2 parent meetings, and then we've also had some people who have started to complete the online feedback form. Not much. We've only had about 5 individuals reporting in that format. I suspect we will get more as we advertise this out through our newsletter. And the information is there verbatim from what was on the form. So that's been our process in the past, so that's what has been included here.
So folks, if they didn't make the facility meetings that we had on September 28th and October 3rd, they're still able to get that feedback in.
Yes, so the form is right there, so it's very easy for people to go on, complete that form, and as well as all of the supporting documents. So the documents that people saw during those information sessions, and it also includes all of the information provided by the facilities task force previously. So the documents that Wolt provided.
All right, questions regarding that or comments from board members?
Mr. President, one of the things I feel like I heard numerous times at the parent meetings was kind of reference to losing neighborhood schools for mega schools, you know, that phrase mega schools. And I wonder, I realize we don't have our own schematics, but I'm remembering the last state school board convention. I know several of us went to a couple of sessions with districts that had recently done mega school, elementary schools that were beautiful. I mean, that I think that maybe would ease parents' concerns a bit about what a big elementary school looks like. So we don't have our own schematics, but I wonder if that would be a way to at least start sharing some information about, you know, we're not talking about building high schools for our elementary school students. These are buildings built for elementary school students, and they still very much retain a lot of what you probably love about your smaller number of students school. So just that thought in response to some of the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as we look at that, I think this was a total misstep on our end last fall, where we talked about building capacities of a 5-section building getting as big as 700, 750 students. We're actually, as we've now finalized the enrollment projections and things like that, we're really talking about, if you went to a 4 elementary option, 2 buildings that are 4 sections, which are the size of currently Prairie, EP Rock, and Rivercrest, and 2 buildings that are essentially 4.5 sections, which is the size of those buildings with 3 additional total classrooms. So they're not mega by any stretch of the imagination. They also, when you look at our enrollment, you're probably at the very, very high end. Maybe you're going to hit 550 students. Prairie currently has, I think, 510, 511 in it. So we're not talking about building mega elementary schools. We're talking about building buildings that are similar to Rivercrest and Prairie with a little bit of additional space, not hundreds of students worth of additional space. And I think that was, something that last year was probably not conveyed very well, either by us or by our consultants, that we looked at that. I have gone through and I have looked at the comments and the feedback as we look at, what questions do people have. I don't know if the board has had the opportunity to look at these different components, and there are a lot of great questions on here. Even people have asked, why not move the 9th grade down into the middle school, 6th grade back into the elementaries? I guess the somewhat simplistic answer would be we're not looking to try to reduce space. We have plenty of space at the high school, and our goal is not to just put kids in buildings just to keep them open, type of thing. Our middle school, we're in a good spot with the middle school. We're in a good spot with the high school. It's a big challenge as we work through some of these. But I think the thing for me is we have been talking about elementary facility planning quite a bit for no less than at least 1 year, and we actually started talking about it pre-COVID when the board said, go ahead and put together a committee, and then it was about to start in March of 2020, and we tabled it basically for a year. So I think the reason it's going to feel kind of rushed right now is because we are in decision-making mode. We do have to start making some decisions. I think the other piece is some of the information that goes out, or the level of detailed information that we put out when we did our last referendum, is that a lot of that happened once a decision was made on the direction that we were going to go. That's when you started to see the renderings that Bray put together. You started to see more space programs. When I say space programs, not NASA-like space programs, but like what does the building look like? What does the footprint of the building look like, and things along those lines. You know, even if we get it down to a few options. But I mean, what other types of things, or what other types of feedback are people hearing out there, or even from the parent meetings, on the direction to move forward?
I think one other thing I would like to see us respond to is this perception, and I think it's a misperception, that if the last enrollment studies were so wrong, why are we trusting these numbers? I've heard versions of that, and I think we saw it even in the feedback, kind of this subtext that when you wanted to build a new school, you told us enrollment was going up, and now, so I think that if there's a way that we can communicate and remind folks, here's what the last projection studies said, here's what we've actually seen, because I think there's some distrust out there about these numbers that we're sharing.
I agree. I think people that look at, well, you condescend to building this big, huge high school. Well, that high school was a disaster before. It had problems. We addressed it, or the people on the board. I wasn't on the board as a member, but that was a responsible way to take care of a concern. And we're not going to have another concern with that space for quite some time. Certainly wasn't overbuilt. And I've heard some people say that, as if we hadn't done the high school remodel, we'd be in so much better shape. Now, we know we wouldn't be. I think a lot of the things I've read online, as far as the district spot where people are putting their comments, or from the parent meeting that we put on at the schools, a lot of those concerns were addressed in the presentation, and meeting with parents after at the tables, talking about it. I think the people that were there taking part in it have a much better understanding than of the needs than what we're saying are the concerns than their questions show, because they did have time after they filled out those forms to talk to board members and Matt from Bray and Nick. I don't know if Nick feels the same way on that, but.
Well, Nick, can you just address that, what Heather raised as far as the perception about the enrollment projection, prior one being quote unquote so far off or wrong?
Mm-hmm. So if you go back and you look at the enrollment projections that we utilized when we were doing the secondary space referendum, we were not pitching that we had this huge growth, and actually we showed 3 different enrollment projections from Tom Gillespie, all showed a dip, and then eventually over 10 years coming back up to about where we would be. So I don't believe we sold that, and I know we also were very clear, I know I was very clear, that we would be back to the public in the next 5 years asking for money for the elementaries. I mean, that was we can go back and look at the videos. That was on every one of these, because we said this will not address, the secondary space thing will not address our needs at our elementaries and the majority of the middle school. So,
But just the fact that enrollment projection, it had kind of 3 different, models of growth and ways of looking at it, but the one that was pessimistic happened to be the one that ended up closer to what actually happened in the last 7 years.
Yeah, and I think nobody predicted back when we had that. Nobody predicted the pandemic, and the just total shift in our student enrollment.
And so now the new projection has taken that into account.
Because we're down those kids, and so we, if all of a sudden the pandemic doesn't happen and we haven't dropped 300 kids in a matter of the last 3 years, our financial outlook looks a lot different. But I think when you couple that, not only the pandemic, but you couple that with also what we've seen housing values do over the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years since we went to referendum last, I don't know if anybody predicted at that time that housing values would give us, you know, the ROI or the, you know, the rising cost that they have over the last 5 years. I think there are very few people that thought that would happen, especially after how badly everything crashed in '08. You know, I think most people thought things are going to be a little bit more tempered. So when you add that to the mix, it's not just the enrollment projections from applied populations, it's looking at other economic indicators. There's not a whole lot of reason to believe that all of a sudden the value of housing in the city of Hudson or the town of Hudson or the town of Troy or town of St. Joe is going to drop like a rock and make it any more affordable to anybody else. If it does drop, it'd probably drop equivalent to what other places are dropping, and so then it's all relative. It's not as though people would have more money. I don't see it becoming any more affordable, but you know, I know people want to say, why trust these projections? They are just projections. I mean, they're not a guarantee.
And I would just
Yeah.
highlight they are 7 years old already.
The
previous
the Gillespie ones, because those were done in 2014, 15. Yeah, so those would be 7 years old. But we did use those projections when we put out the survey last fall. We had those same number. We used literally the exact same slides from our survey in 2015 for last year's.
I think part of the reticence or delay in accepting those numbers, whether that's a current delay because of the survey or the projection we just got, or the one that was from 7 years ago, is similar to what I experienced when I went down to Madison this last weekend for a WASB. I'm on the State Policy and Resolutions Committee, and we have our name tags, and they say, "Oh, you're from Hudson," and we started talking about facility issues. Everyone has their facility issues. And I said, yeah, we've experienced some big decline in enrollment over the last 4 years. And they were like, what? Hudson is growing so rapidly. And I said, yes, St. Croix County is growing rapidly. Hudson City and surrounding area, our school district overall has a lot more numbers of people, but we don't have the students. And what was feeding our growth, and this is long before I was on the board, what was feeding our growth was not only the houses that were being built out in the townships and the expanding city boundary, places like Red Cedar or Cedar Canyon, and but it was the move-ins. That's what our previous superintendent would ask at the graduation ceremony is, okay, all those people who have moved in here since kindergarten stand up, and more than half the kids would stand up. That's not going to be true anymore, because the affordability of being able to move into Hudson is much different today than what it was 15 to 20 years ago. That's just the reality. But anyway, so again, I see these comments. There's 23 pages of them. By the way, anybody in the community can go online and see those and add their own. But there is still, even though those people got a presentation from Bray on this stuff, they're still putting in comments and asking questions. It's that they're not accepting of maybe the information or whatever. It is going to be a challenge in communications, but I think we have to continue to communicate, and that's what we're going to do with the mailer that's going to go out. That's what we're going to do with the November 1st meeting, and it will be a continual process. We're not going to have 90% of the community all educated and up to speed, and then be able to take a vote on how things are going to happen. That's not going to be probably even happen for April, let alone try to do that before our decision on January 23rd. So is there other comments on the parent meetings that I think all of us attended at least one, and some were there for all four, so, or three or four, so.
Jamie, just one other thing I'd call out, because I see it in the comments, and I definitely heard it at the meetings, was just this real appreciation for and concern for our staff. I mean, yes, we don't want to lay off staff. And even beyond that, just the creating culture is really hard. Whatever we do, we need to make sure that we are really being intentional about caring for our staff, because and I mean, I believe, and some of the parents that we're talking believe, we have really good staff. They will create good culture even in new configurations and new buildings, and they're going to need support to do that. So just to not to be really mindful that transition is hard for families, can be hard for kids, but that it's also hard for our staff, and to make sure that we're mindful about that wherever we land with this process.
Other questions? The hope is that out of all this, you're going to develop a kind of a frequently asked question. Not going to answer every question, but at least the more frequently asked ones, and then that'll be part of the information that will also be given out on November 1st.
Correct. Actually, it'll go in the newsletter, and we'll have it online.
Excellent. All right. Molly, do you have
I
something?
had a couple comments. Just Heather reminded me, I had talked to a parent at North Hudson and ended up staying later talking to her, and she made a comment that I thought was just so insightful, that we don't know what teachers can do, because teachers can do amazing things. And I just thought that was just a wonderful kind of acclamation for the staff that we do have. The other thought I was thinking of is, you know, after we had some of these meetings and, you know, you have lots of different opinions, I have had trouble sleeping, thinking about how hard this is for people, that I would like people to know that this isn't, it isn't a simple thing for all of us. We all feel super sad, and it's a really difficult process, but that we have to do what's responsible for the community as a whole. So that's it.
Anything else? Any other comments? Otherwise, let's see, next on our agenda is, I guess, a motion to go into closed session.
Jamie, can I just add one final, because Molly made me think about it. I think
Sure.
what worries me is that I feel like there's this sense that we're talking about doing what's right for our taxpayers, not what's right for our kids. And I think that what we need to figure out to get through is that this is about making sure that long term we are able to do right by our kids. I mean, that is, so yes, it's, you know, for someone who's worried about their kid 3 years from now, it feels like this isn't right for my kid, but stepping back, it really is about making hard decisions so that we are positioned in the, you know, over the long haul to be able to do right by our kids and be able to have great staff, provide really good core and extracurricular programming to provide what we're providing today, even years down the road in different financial situations. I think we have to make sure we don't lose that it's not a money before kids. They are related, and long term we need to do what's right for our kids and for our community, so that we don't lose that in the communication as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Heather. Anyone else have a comment along that vein? I think to that end about, you know, doing what's best for our kids, it's all about a perception. I remember when we did the rebounding process, there such involvement and interest in it because everyone seemed to have a vested interest in their school. And it actually made me feel good because everyone loves their schools that their kids go to. And, you know, Rivercrest and Hudson Prairie are schools that are designed to have, you know, roughly 600 kids. So that's not necessarily a mega school, one that's harmful to kids. You wouldn't get that from any of the parents that are there. At least I haven't heard that to date, that they want, you know, Rivercrest split into 3 schools so they have smaller schools to go to. Again, it's about the teachers and being able to retain quality teachers, retain our class sizes. That's why we're doing this as a school board, is not having to make decisions and be closer to what they are in Minnesota with 30 to 35 kids in a classroom. We want to avoid that. That's why we're having these discussions. So, all right. Otherwise, I guess now would be the time. I'll entertain a motion on closed session.
Mr. President, I move to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent G, to confer with legal counsel who is rendering advice concerning strategy to be adopted with respect to litigation.
Second.
Motion by Heather, second by Bob. This calls for a roll call vote. Bauman?
Aye.
Brown? Aye. Garza? Aye. Logland? Aye. Powers?
Aye.
Whitaker? Aye. Johnson? Aye. The ayes have it. We are adjourning to closed session, and from there we will be adjourning the meeting. Thank you all for attending.